You remember your promise, right?
Mom, I'm sorry.
You don't even know. If you want to know why I had to die, listen from the beginning.
Her name was Miriam. In her rural village in Nigeria, life was measured not in years, but in rainy seasons and dry seasons, in the crowing of roosters at dawn and the constant hum of insects after nightfall. Miriam lived quietly like a thin shadow sliding across red earth. If anyone asked who she was, she never spoke about herself. She would only say one simple sentence, like a vow. I am Yusuf's mother. Her husband died early. Gone as quickly as a passing wind, leaving behind a silence no one could fill. When his body was carried out of their mud house, Miriam stood behind the door, her fingers gripping the wooden frame until they bled. No one saw the first tear fall onto the dry ground. She cried without a sound, because even tears felt like a luxury when there was still a child in the house who needed food, warmth, and an adult who could stand without breaking. She had only one child her entire life, Yusuf. Yusuf was born on a night of heavy rain. Rain pounded the thatched roof like clenched fists, and Miriam bit her lip so she wouldn't scream. She thought she might die. But when she heard her baby's first cry, her body felt pulled back from the edge. He was tiny, dark-skinned, eyes tightly shut. His small hand clenched, as if holding on to the world itself. Miriam lifted him up, breathed in the smell of milk and rain on his skin, and whispered to herself, "This is enough. I can do this." She sold charcoal. Not from a shop, but balanced on her shoulders, walking over rocky dirt roads, standing in the village market, calling out in a hoarse voice, "Charcoal, good charcoal." Black dust stained her fingernails, settled into her wrinkles, clung to old scars on her hands. Some days she sold everything and returned home with a small bag of rice and a little dried fish. Other days it rained. The charcoal got wet. No one bought it. She carried it back home, the basket heavier from the water, heavy like the worry in her chest. She carried water for others. The well was far. The path down was slippery. She balanced buckets on her head, each step slow, her neck and back stretched tight with pain. Water sometimes leaked onto her shoulders, cold and sharp. People paid her a few coins. Sometimes a rushed thank you, but Miriam kept working. Because every morning, Yusuf woke up and looked at her with eyes full of trust and hunger. She raised him on small coins and hungry nights. On cold evenings, wind slipped through the cracks of the house. Miriam lay beside her son, listening to his stomach growl. Yusuf turned his face toward the wall, trying to hide his weakness. But Miriam knew. A mother always knows. She pulled him close, used her own body heat to warm him, and whispered into his hair, "Sleep. Tomorrow I'll find something." Tomorrow became the promise she repeated every day, so she wouldn't collapse. And most mornings, she did find something. Not much, but enough for Yusuf to live. Enough so her son would never have to bow his head and beg for food. Yusuf grew up barefoot, with thin notebooks, and a stomach that was sometimes empty. But he had something Miriam never did. He looked far ahead. He learned quickly. He remembered everything. He watched cars pass on the main road and asked, "Mom, can I leave the village someday?" The question tightened Miriam's chest. Not because she didn't want him to go, but because she understood, to leave is to grow distant. To leave is to one day have a different life, one that might no longer have room for his mother. Still, Miriam nodded, because that nod was all her love. When Yusuf went to school, Miriam learned that dreams have a price. The price of books, of pens, of uniforms without tears, of sandals that wouldn't break mid-walk. The highest price of all was other people's eyes. Some whispered, "Why educate her son? He'll stay poor anyway." Others shook their heads. "That boy dreams too big." Miriam never answered. She just worked harder. She skipped meals so Yusuf could eat breakfast. She sold her prettiest scarf to buy a math book. She carried water until her scalp burned from the weight, then lit an oil lamp at night and sat beside Yusuf as he studied. And in those moments, when Yusuf bent over his notebook, lips moving as he read, eyes glowing with fire, Miriam knew everything she endured had meaning. Once, Yusuf looked at her, his voice tight, as if he finally understood the burden on her shoulders. "Mom, are you tired?" Miriam smiled, reached up and touched his cheek, warm from the lamp and from youth. Miriam whispering, "As long as you finish school, I can endure anything." It wasn't a sentence. It was a prayer. Then came the day Yusuf left the village. The whole village gathered. Some offered congratulations, some smirked. Miriam stood among them, holding a small bag she packed for him, a little food, some dried fish, a shirt carefully patched with thread. Yusuf was much taller than her now, dark-skinned, thin-faced, but his eyes were hard like stone shaped by pressure. "Mom, I'll send money," Miriam nodded. She wanted to hold him tight, to say, "Don't go." But instead, she said, "Go, don't look back." Yusuf stepped onto the old bus. The engine started. Red dust rose, swallowing her son's figure. Miriam stood there a long time, watching until the road was empty again. At first, Yusuf called. His voice came through her old phone, mixed with city noise, car horns, voices, construction. He talked about work, sleeping on floors, living on instant noodles and tap water. Miriam listened and swallowed her tears. "Are you okay, Mom?" Yusuf asked. "I'm fine," she said, even though her back hurt so badly she could barely stand upright. Then the calls grew rare. 1 week, 2 weeks, 1 month. Yusuf left the village, went to the city, and then silence. No money. Miriam kept selling charcoal, kept carrying water, kept living as before, except now she carried a quiet waiting in her chest, heavy like a stone. She waited for money to fix the leaking roof. She waited for a message to know her son was alive. She waited for a sign. None came. She comforted herself. He must be busy. Then scolded herself. Don't be weak, Miriam. Then lied to herself. Maybe his phone is broken. People asked, where is Yusuf? Miriam smiled, forcing calm. Working in the city. But at night, when no one watched, she pressed her phone to her chest like it was a heart and listened to the emptiness. Sometimes she dreamed Yusuf stood at the door, calling, "Mom." She would wake in a panic, heart racing, run outside, only to find wind and darkness. Rain fell through the torn roof, each drop striking her like grief. Time passed, her hair turned gray. Her eyes grew tired. Still, she lived. Because part of her believed that one day Yusuf would return. And when he did, he would see her and understand. Then, one late afternoon, when the red earth shimmered with heat, when children's laughter echoed in the distance, Miriam sat at her doorway, mending an old shirt. That's when she heard a strange sound. Not the rattle of an old motorcycle, but smooth wheels. A low engine, polished metal gliding over dust. Miriam looked up. A luxury car rolled slowly into the village, something that didn't belong here. Sunlight reflected off its surface, forcing her to squint. Villagers stopped their work. Children ran alongside it, shouting in curiosity. The car stopped in front of her house. The door opened. And Miriam felt her heart strike once, a painful beat, carrying all the years of waiting as she saw Yusuf. Returning in a luxury car, Yusuf was about to get married. The news did not reach Miriam through a proper invitation, nor a joyful phone call like the one she had once imagined. It arrived as loose gossip at the market, passed from mouth to mouth, mixed with bargaining voices and casual laughter. "Miriam's son is marrying a rich woman," one woman said, her tone half curious, half envious. "They say the bride's family owns land in the city. Stores, cars." Miriam froze among baskets of black charcoal on red earth. In that moment, Her heart pounded like a festival drum. She wanted to ask more, to know the date, the place, to know whether Yusuf had mentioned his mother. But she didn't ask. She was afraid of the answers, afraid of the way people would look at her with pity, like something old, worn out, about to be left behind. That night, Miriam sat in front of her mud house. The oil lamp flickered weakly, as if struggling to hold back the darkness. She thought of Yusuf as a child, bare feet running across red soil, bright eyes, a mouth that never stopped asking why. She remembered the promise he made before leaving the village. "I'll send money home." That promise had drifted into silence for years, like a letter that was never mailed. But marriage meant something else. Marriage meant Yusuf was alive. Yusuf was stepping into another life. Miriam felt like a root buried deep in the ground, unseen, yet the whole tree had once lived because of it. She didn't need praise. She only wanted to stand there once, to see her son on his important day, to know that no matter how far he had gone, there was still a small corner in his heart for his mother. The wedding day came faster than she expected. That morning, the village woke earlier than usual, voices calling out, barefoot children running, laughter rising as if to mask quiet jealousy. Miriam bathed with cold well water. She combed her hair carefully, even though it was gray and thinning. She chose her oldest dress, so old the fabric had faded into a gentle brownish gray. She stitched a loose hem, as if mending a piece of her dignity. When Miriam stepped onto the road, red dust clung to her heels. She didn't stop. She walked toward the large house at the edge of the village, the house Yusuf had rented for the celebration. It was nothing like anything she had ever known. Tall walls, an iron gate, plastic chairs lined up in the yard, neat like church pews, colorful fabric hung everywhere. Lights were being installed, sound equipment tested. Music burst out, so loud and lively it made Miriam feel smaller. The guests arrived in crowds. They came from the city, wearing fine clothes and polished shoes. Their voices were quick and confident, like people who had never counted coins to survive a single day. Miriam stood outside the gate, her fingers gripping the edge of her dress. She didn't step in right away. She waited. She wanted to see Yusuf first, to be sure she hadn't walked into a dream that didn't belong to her. Then Yusuf appeared. She recognized him instantly, even though he had changed. He was tall now, broad-shouldered. His dark skin glowed in the sun, his hair neatly cut. He wore a carefully tailored traditional wedding outfit, elegant and serious at once. His face was no longer the face of the boy who slept on the dirt floor. It was the face of a man who had learned to hide exhaustion behind calm eyes. Miriam wanted to call out, "Yusuf," but her voice caught in her throat. In that crowd, the name Yusuf suddenly felt distant, as if it belonged to someone else. The wedding preparations were lavish. The smell of food filled the air, grilled meat, spices, hot oil. People carried trays. Phones were raised for photos. Laughter rang out. Miriam stood behind the gate like a tree no one noticed. She watched Yusuf shake hands. She saw him smile, a polite smile, measured, neither fully real nor fully fake. She told herself, just look for a moment. Stand here, then leave. She didn't want to disturb anything. She didn't want to embarrass her son. She only wanted her heart to be at peace. But Miriam's peace was not allowed to last. A well-dressed woman approached the gate. Expensive fabric, jewelry bright as sunlight, perfume hanging in the air like authority. Her eyes scanned Miriam from head to toe, a look that needed no words to make someone shrink. Bride's mother, and you are. Who? The question wasn't curiosity. It was a velvet-wrapped blade. Miriam opened her mouth, but before she could answer, Yusuf stiffened, as if someone had pulled a tight cord inside him. He turned. He saw Miriam. For a brief moment, surprise flashed in his eyes. Then something else replaced it. Worry, fear, like a man standing between two cliffs. Yusuf quietly. My mother. Just 3 words. But Miriam felt her throat burn. She had waited years to hear that word, mother, like waiting for rain during drought. She thought hearing it would bring joy. But before that joy could bloom, a cold spread across the yard. The air froze. As if everyone suddenly remembered what they didn't want to say, that the groom's mother was not like them. That she carried the smell of cooking smoke, red earth, and a poverty that made people uncomfortable. The bride's mother looked at Yusuf, then at Miriam, like a stain on white tile. Bride's mother, coldly, "She cannot be here at this wedding." No one objected. No one said stop. Laughter faded. Phones lowered. Miriam heard her own heartbeat, slow, heavy, clear. She looked at Yusuf. For just 1 second, she hoped her son would step forward and say, "This is my mother." She stays. She had fed that hope with hungry nights, with aching shoulders from carrying water, with meals she skipped so he could buy books. That hope was thin, like the thread she used to mend her dress, but it was the last thread holding her heart together. Yusuf said nothing. His lips tightened. His hand clenched slightly, but he stood still, as if he had chosen silence, because silence felt safer than truth. Miriam lowered her head. She nodded once. Not because she agreed, but because she understood. She understood that in some places, a mother's love is not enough to pay the price of a son's pride. Miriam did not argue. She did not cry. Even tears, she knew, could become a disturbance, and she refused to be a burden on her son's wedding day. She simply stepped back. One step. That night, the rain came down hard. Rain in rural Nigeria doesn't fall the way it does elsewhere. It doesn't drizzle or patter gently, giving people time to close doors or pull laundry inside. It pours like the sky itself is angry. It slams against torn thatched roofs, pounds into mud walls, hammers the courtyard in heavy, relentless beats. Wind tears through cracks in the door, carrying the smell of wet leaves and mud. In the darkness, the whole village feels swallowed by a giant mouth, leaving only the sound of rain and the sound of human hearts pounding. Miriam sat alone in her old mud house. The oil lamp flickered, its flame thin as a thread, trembling every time the wind slipped in. She had wrapped herself in a light shawl instead of her old dress, but she was still cold. Not from the rain, from the day itself. The bride's mother's stare, Yusuf's silence, her own step backward. All of it stayed lodged in her chest, heavy like a soaked stone. She placed both hands on her knees and stared at the dirt floor. This floor had absorbed so many of her tears without anyone ever knowing. She told herself she had done the right thing, that she shouldn't have been there, that she shouldn't have put her son in an impossible position. But the more she told herself, the more her heart ached. In the darkness, memories returned. Yusuf as a child, bare feet running through the rain, laughing as if poverty could never catch childhood. The nights he burned with fever, when she sat awake fanning him, praying the sky would not take the only thing she had in this life. The day Yusuf left, how he turned back to look at her once, his eyes hard yet wet, as if he wanted to say something but couldn't. Miriam lifted her head. She looked at the old phone resting on the wooden shelf, silent for years, silent, just like Yusuf had been. She took a deep breath. "Don't be weak," she told herself. "Tomorrow I'll carry water again. Tomorrow I'll sell charcoal again. Tomorrow I'll keep living." And then someone knocked. Not the frantic, uneven knocking of a neighbor escaping the rain, but 3 slow knocks, even, deliberate, like someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Miriam froze. She wasn't expecting anyone. On a night like this, who would come? She stood up and walked to the door, each step loud on the damp earth. Her hand touched the wooden bar. Cold. Is someone there?" she asked, her voice shrinking beneath the rain. Outside stood a figure under the eaves. The lamplight barely revealed a dark sleeve, a headscarf, and shoes far too clean for a villager. A voice answered clear, calm, unhurried. Not Sister Miriam, as villagers called her. Not Yusuf's mother, as others did. But Miriam, polite, distant. A chill ran down her spine. She opened the door. The woman stepped inside without asking, not rudely, but with the ease of someone used to entering other people's homes. Rain dripped from the edge of her scarf, each drop landing clearly on the dirt floor. When she pulled the scarf back, Mariam saw dark skin, light makeup, sharp, composed eyes. She didn't look like a woman from the village. She smelled of perfume. Clean, expensive, out of place in a house filled with cooking smoke and damp earth. The woman's gaze moved around the room, assessing everything. The cracked mud walls, the bamboo bed, the old aluminum pot, the weak oil lamp. Her eyes held no pity, only cold calculation. Mariam closed the door, her hands shaking. "Who are you?" she asked. The woman didn't answer right away. She pulled a chair closer to the table and sat down, like she belonged there. Then she placed an envelope on the table, thick, so thick Mariam instantly knew it wasn't documents. It was money. Mariam stared at the envelope as if it were a coiled snake. She didn't touch it. The woman spoke, her voice low and precise, like someone reading terms already agreed upon. "We'll take care of everything." She tapped the envelope lightly with one finger. The sound was soft, but in the quiet house, it landed like a hammer against Mariam's heart. "You only need to disappear." The word disappear was spoken lightly, but Mariam felt as if someone had closed a hand around her throat. "Tomorrow you will be dead." For 1 second, Mariam couldn't breathe. She stared at the woman, eyes wide, unable to believe what she had just heard. Outside, the rain continued to pound, as if the sky itself had not heard what was spoken in this house. "Dead?" Mariam repeated, her voice hoarse. I'm sitting right here." The woman raised her hand. "Not truly dead," she said calmly, as if discussing a change of locks. "Dead on paper. Dead in the story. Dead in the memories of those who need you gone." Mariam shuddered. She thought of Yusuf. She thought of his eyes when the bride's mother told her she didn't belong. She thought of his silence, a silence that felt like a wordless agreement. Her hands began to tremble so badly she had to grip her dress to stay upright. She looked at the envelope. Just looking made her throat burn dry. "Why?" Mariam asked, her voice breaking. "Why do this?" The woman tilted her head, studying Mariam as if the answer were obvious. "You know why," she said. Mariam opened her mouth, then closed it. She did know. Because she was poor. Because she was a trace of a past they didn't want attached to their future. Because she reminded them of hunger years, of smoke-stained walls, of calloused hands. Because in wedding photos, no one wants an old woman in a faded dress standing beside a wealthy family. Mariam looked down at her palms. Dark lines etched by charcoal, mud, and years of labor. Everything she had done. Everything she had endured. Reduced to one cold phrase, unnecessary. Her body trembled. My son." She stammered, as if saying her title might save her. Then she lifted her head, eyes red. "Mariam, what about my son?" The question escaped like a cry, not for money, not for dignity. For Yusuf, if she disappeared, what would he think? How would he live? Would it hurt him? Or would he feel relieved? The woman looked at Mariam. There was no open cruelty in her eyes. Only ruthless certainty, the look of someone speaking on behalf of power. She spoke slowly, letting each word fall like cold rain. "Woman, he will live better. Without you." The next morning, the rain had softened, but the sky remained gray like cooled ash. The red dirt road was soaked. Tire tracks cut deep into the mud, holding water like wounds that hadn't dried yet. The air felt colder than usual, a cold that slipped into the skin like a whisper of something bad about to happen. The whole village gathered. People came quickly, as if bad news pulled harder than good. From low mud houses, from narrow paths behind palm trees, from the small market, groups poured in. Some wore dark scarves. Some dressed in simple mourning clothes. Some had only thrown on old shirts, eyes wide more with curiosity than grief. Here, a funeral was sometimes a ritual, but it was also a story everyone wanted to hear firsthand. The funeral was arranged quickly. No time for long preparations, no waiting for distant relatives, no heartfelt eulogies. Everything moved fast, as if someone feared that if they slowed down, the truth might catch up. Whispers floated through the crowd. They say she died during the night. Poor woman. At least she's being buried properly. The words drifted through the air like red dust on a dry day, touching one ear, falling from another mouth, and slowly turning into something more solid than truth. No one asked how she died. They only said, she's dead, as if the death of a poor woman were natural, like a fallen leaf. While they spoke, Miriam stood at the end of the narrow path leading to the funeral yard. She wore an old scarf over her head. Its edge was still damp from the night's rain. She stayed close to the fence's shadow, where leaves hid part of her face. She didn't dare step closer. Not because she feared being recognized. She had already accepted that she was dead, but because she feared that if she took one more step, her legs would betray her and carry her straight to her son, to wrap him in her arms and scream, "I'm here." But Miriam couldn't. She had sold her existence for an envelope, not out of greed, but because she had been forced to choose between her son's honor and her own breath. And she chose her son, as she always had. The coffin was placed in the center of the yard, a new coffin, polished wood, covered with cloth. It looked more dignified than anything Miriam had ever owned in her life. Her throat tightened as she stared at it. All her life, she had slept on a creaking bamboo bed, patched and repaired countless times. And now, her death was being sealed inside a box so beautiful, Miriam couldn't see inside. But she knew it was empty. Empty like her phone during all those silent years. Empty like the seat by the cooking fire since her husband died. Empty like an apology that came too late. A man from the village began to pray. His voice echoed under the gray sky, trying to make the moment sacred, heads bowed. A few sighs escaped. A few eyes were genuinely wet. But most eyes kept wandering, watching, waiting, guessing what Yusuf would do. Then Yusuf arrived. Not from Miriam's house, but from the main road where the cars were parked. He walked into the yard wearing dark, clean clothes so different from the men of the village. He looked like someone who belonged elsewhere, to a city, to a different life, to a future. But the certainty he had worn on his wedding day was gone. His face looked exhausted, fractured. Yusuf knelt. The moment silenced the crowd, as if they had just been given the scene they were waiting for. They watched him kneel before the coffin. They watched his shoulders shake, and they began to believe. Believe that this funeral was real, because a man's tears are often considered the strongest proof. He cried, not quietly, but in sobs pulled up from deep inside his chest, as if he had held them back for too long. His hands clutched the edge of the cloth covering the coffin. His forehead nearly touched the wood. He trembled. "Yusuf, Mom, I'm sorry I didn't come back sooner." The words fell onto the dirt like a stone. Miriam heard them, every word clear, and her heart felt crushed. Sorry. She had waited years for that word. She waited through hot afternoons under a leaking roof, through mornings carrying water until her shoulders went numb, through hungry nights when she pulled her child close and lied, saying, "I'm not hungry," through every silent glance at her phone, telling herself, "He's just busy." She waited for that apology, and now that it came before an empty coffin. Tears flooded Miriam's eyes, hot, burning, but she bit her lip to keep from making a sound. She was afraid her sobs would shatter everything, that all eyes would turn. Afraid she would run forward, pull her son up, and say, "I'm here." But she couldn't. Cut. At the edge of the crowd, under the gray sky, rain began to fall again, lightly, as if the sky itself refused to let this moment stay dry. Raindrops hit Miriam's face, mixing with her tears until she could no longer tell which was rain and which was pain. In the rain, Miriam stood there. No one saw her. She stood close to the fence like a shadowed tree. People passed by without noticing. They filmed. They took photos. They sighed. They shook their heads. No one asked, "Where's Yusuf's mother?" Because they believed the answer lay inside that box. Miriam watched her son, watched the way Yusuf knelt, watched him cry like a child, watched his hands tremble on the coffin. And in that moment, she wanted to believe that Yusuf was still Yusuf, her son, the boy who once clung to her legs and said, "Mom, don't leave me." But the truth was cruel, in a different way. Yusuf was crying for a mother he believed was dead. He didn't know she was standing here. Didn't know she was watching him, hearing every word, hurting with every breath. Didn't know she had disappeared so he could live better. Miriam watched her son cry for a mother who was never allowed to exist. After the funeral, Miriam left the village like someone who no longer belonged there. No one saw her off. No one asked questions. No one looked back. And that more than anything made her steps feel lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because she didn't have to face anyone's eyes. Heavier because she understood that from this moment on, her existence would no longer be confirmed by anyone. No one would call her name on the red dirt road. No one would say, "Miriam," in the marketplace. No one would greet her with a familiar voice. She had died in other people's stories. The sky remained overcast. Rain still clung to palm leaves, dripping slowly onto her shoulders. The road out of the village was thick with mud, clinging to her feet as if trying to hold her back. Miriam walked without turning around. She was afraid that if she did, she would see the old mud house, the place where she once sat mending Yusuf's clothes, where she once pressed her palm to his forehead when he had a fever. She was afraid that if she saw it, she wouldn't be able to keep walking. A dark, worn headscarf covered her hair, hiding part of her face. On her shoulder hung a small cloth bag. Inside were a few changes of clothes, a broken toothed comb, an old photograph creased with age, and the envelope of money, wrapped in fabric to keep it dry. Miriam didn't want to look at the envelope. She didn't want to feel the money in her hands, because every bill felt like another layer of dirt being thrown over her name. No name, no papers, no past. She stepped into a world where people only exist if someone calls them by name. But Miriam no longer had a name to be called. She became a woman no one knew from the very first moment. She took a bus to a nearby town, then traveled farther. The journey passed like a dream. Miriam curled into a corner of the bus, watching raindrops slide down the window. The scenery changed, fields, houses, markets, then denser streets, louder traffic, brighter lights. The city didn't ask who she was. The city simply swallowed her, like a grain of sand. Miriam found a place to stay in a crowded neighborhood, where the room was smaller than the kitchens of wealthy people. She worked, washing dishes at a food stall, sweeping other people's floors, collecting bottles, doing laundry. Every job needed the same kind of person, someone quiet, someone who didn't ask questions, someone without a past. Miriam fit perfectly. She had lived with silence her entire life. She began to live like a shadow that left no trace. During the day, she worked. At night, she returned to the small room, locked the door, and sat on a thin mattress listening to the city breathe. The city breathed through distant engines, arguments, music drifting from somewhere, children crying, water dripping from a leaking pipe. Miriam didn't belong to those sounds, but she had to hear them. Because if she didn't, she would hear only herself, the sound of years that could never return. The first nights, Miriam couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, the funeral came back. Not the coffin, not the prayers, but Yusuf kneeling before the empty coffin. She remembered his shaking shoulders, the way his hands clutched the edge of the cloth like a lifeline, the sobs pulled from his chest like a blade drawn from a wound, and most of all, his voice breaking in the wet courtyard. "Mom, I'm sorry." Each time that memory returned, Miriam felt her heart tighten as if someone were crushing it. She had waited years for that apology. She waited through hot afternoons under a leaking roof, through mornings carrying water until her shoulders went numb, through hungry nights when she pulled her child close and lied, saying, "I'm not hungry," through every silent glance at her phone, whispering to herself, "He's just busy." She waited for that apology. And now that it came before an empty coffin. Mariam lay in the darkness, pressing her hand over her mouth to keep from crying out. Her tears soaked into the thin mattress, fast as rain sinking into soil. She didn't cry from hunger. She didn't cry from exhaustion. She cried for something crueler, that her love had been turned into an object for others to arrange. Every night, she returned to the moment her son knelt before a false grave. She remembered how people looked at Yusuf with admiration. She remembered their words, "Yusuf is such a devoted son. He really loved his mother." They didn't know that his mother was standing at the edge of the crowd, stripped of the right to exist. They didn't know that this devotion was being sustained by a lie. It wasn't about the money. Mariam kept the envelope. She used only a small portion to survive. She couldn't bring herself to spend the rest, not because she wanted wealth, but because she feared that, if the money ran out, her disappearance would become meaningless, as if she had died for nothing in return for Yusuf. She hated that feeling, the feeling of being a commodity, bought outright. But what kept her awake wasn't the money. It was that sentence. The sentence the elegant woman had spoken in the old mud house, while rain battered the roof and the oil lamp trembled. A sentence light as air, yet sharper than any blade. "He will live better without you." Mariam repeated it in her mind, like someone chewing on a shard of bone. Live better. Better how? Better by marrying into wealth without a poor mother standing beside him. Better by taking wedding photos without her calloused hands in the frame. Better by stepping into a grand house without carrying the smell of cooking smoke from the past. She tried to comfort herself. Maybe it was true. Maybe Yusuf needed that peace. Maybe a mother like her only dragged him down. But then Mariam remembered, if she were truly just a burden, why had Yusuf cried? That question pierced her every night like a needle. If my son was in pain from losing his mother, why do they still say he lives better without her? Mariam turned toward the wall, eyes open in the darkness. And she understood something that made her chest go cold. Sometimes people don't need to kill someone to erase them. They only need to convince the world that the person was never necessary. And Mariam, a poor mother, a dark-skinned woman with charcoal-stained hands, had been erased that way. By an envelope, by a funeral, by a single sentence. "He will live better without you." If a mother disappears so her child can rise, is that love or erasure? Mariam once believed that a mother's love was something that could not be erased. It lived in blood, in bone, in every breath. It was there each time she bent down to tie her son's worn sandals, each time she gave her portion of food to Yusuf and lied, saying she was already full. To Mariam, being a mother was not a role, it was an existence. And then she disappeared. No one killed her. No one dragged her from her bed in the middle of the night. No bruises, no blood on the red earth. She was simply removed from the wedding, removed from the family photograph, removed from the story people told about Yusuf's success. They called it sacrifice. They said, she did it for her son. They said, that's a mother's love. But Mariam knew a different truth. Because real sacrifice is when you are allowed to stay and you choose to leave. And she was never given that choice. She was informed, she was arranged. She was handed an envelope and told to disappear politely. And once she did, the world ran more smoothly. No poor mother standing behind the gate. No calloused hands appearing on a joyful day. No past making anyone uncomfortable. Everything became neat, clean. Yusuf was allowed to rise, allowed to marry, allowed to hold his head high, and Mariam was allowed to be silent. She lived, but she lived as something unspoken. like a footnote erased from the history of her own son. No one asked where she was. No one wondered why a mother vanished just before her child's wedding. Because when an entire community agrees that you are unnecessary, your disappearance is no longer a tragedy. It becomes a solution. They didn't kill her. They didn't touch her. They simply stripped meaning from her existence. They turned her into something with no place in another person's future. And when that happens, violence is no longer required. No knife, no blood, no screams. Just a cold decision wrapped in polite words. And sometimes, that is the cleanest cruelty of all.